Hi there, and welcome to the Look-See. This is November 2023, and a look at what is happening in the world and where are we going. Things continue to heat up in many places, and every month I think to myself, well, they can't possibly get any worse, and then they do. However, I see a lot of signs that people are moving in the right direction with the right attitudes and ideas. So this month's Look-See is going to be a little bit different because it has the potential of affecting many people, hopefully for the better, and it is somewhat time sensitive, and people have been writing to ask, how do I deal with this? I'm going to put it out a little bit early and everywhere, not just on Patreon or Transition Talks Quartet. So let's begin. In the last Look-See, I could see a big event coming, and I tried to describe it without getting too far into the weeds. It kept coming to me in pieces, and after writing down the pieces that I saw, I had the thought, if a big event is coming, and it didn't look really positive, is there a corresponding big event coming that we could get excited about? What doors would it open? What might it look like? And within a couple of weeks, I received an email that answered my question about a corresponding big event. And the result of that email is presented here as this month's Look-See. I call this the timeline crossover. So I'll begin by saying I think this is important for all of us. I've spent 43 years studying and working with consciousness in order to better understand how it works, how we know things, how we know each other. And I've always been interested in what we are doing with consciousness and how we are creating or impacting the reality system we live in. So in that 43 years of study, one thing has become clear. In our relationship with one another, we begin picking up bits and pieces of information from the reality around us that tell us ahead of time what's coming our way, because we do, in fact, shape, create, and change the whole system through our words and our actions. If something occurs that I can't figure out what it's related to, or why I saw that or experienced it, or why I dreamed it, and I can't integrate that piece of information with the flow of information that I'm currently observing and studying, I put that aside in what I call my mental filing cabinet, and I wait for further information. So I'm going to present 5 pieces of information from my mental filing cabinet that didn't quite fit anywhere at the time they occurred, but now have come together to present something hopeful. And I am very interested in maintaining hope. I am biased for hope. Why? Because hope nurtures faith, and faith nurtures belief. Belief is what drives intent, and intent is what drives action. So my intent is to help the planet shift to a higher frequency of consciousness. And my goal in coming here has been to help us all take an evolutionary step upward into at least the lower ranges of fourth dimensional living, which does require a change of consciousness. So as an aside, for those of you who want to understand the subtle differences between third, fourth, and fifth dimensional living, here's a link to a document I put together and have been slowly adding to over the past year and a half. It's a chart describing the attitudes and approach to various aspects of living in 3D, 4D, and 5D reality systems. So continuing on, We humans say we live on planet Earth in the year 2023 and that we have been here for thousands of years. We have a history. We call this our world. We think of it as our world, and it is our world. But it's also helpful to think of it as a reality system that has formed within that great ocean that we call space. It's an ocean of frequencies. Okay? Our reality exists in a given range of frequencies. It's kind of like we live in one octave on the piano. Okay? There are other reality systems that exist in the higher or lower ranges, not only on or around planet Earth, but across the entire cosmos. And using the frequencies we are composed of, each of us creates and manages our own reality. Together, the whole 8 billion of us create and manage our reality system. The nature of reality is much more complex than we grew up thinking it was. So here we are, stumbling along in our world, our reality system, where a handful of greedy fools have almost, and that's almost, gotten control of everything. Our time, we all march off to work at the same time every day and march home at the same time every day. Our money, obviously, our minds, our hearts, our lifestyles. And now, thanks to the thing in the arm, our bodies. So there's much more that could be said there, but for now, just know that our system has started to devolve and to head into lower frequencies. So in the face of this, we have some options. We can go along with it and see what happens. That's one option. The great value of time spent in a 3D world is likely to be the awareness that, man, things could be so much better if only we could just fill in the blank there with whatever you would like to see happen. So, and that is true. It's true that things could be so much better. So that kind of thinking that things could be better, leads a lot of people to pursue rescuing the situation or trying to transform the situation. Of course, the reality we have is the result of the consciousness we hold. So the trying to rescue or transform anything without changing your consciousness mostly amounts to rearranging the deck chairs on a sinking ship. And this leads us to a third option. And that option is to seek to evolve into a slightly higher set of frequencies. These higher frequencies unavoidably require a change in consciousness, which then changes the situation and brings up new solutions, new possibilities. This option to evolve is often talked about in the realms of high consciousness beings as the maturation process or as stepping into your power. Sometimes they refer to it as the awakening to the spirit of self, sometimes as the shift, and other times as the harvest. Humans grow to the point where they simply must choose an alignment. That alignment has only two options: an alignment with death or an alignment with life. We are at that point now, and we have to make a choice. A few things have come together to indicate that we may indeed be at the point of having to make a choice. Or maybe I should say having the opportunity to make a choice. So bear in mind that there is usually no warning, there's no report card, there's no executive order handed down, and no media announcement calling for a shift of consciousness. You have to make your choice freely and without knowing that you are being tested. There are not many obvious signs or signals that say, time's up. Why? Because the change has to come from within as a wholehearted, whole-minded decision on the part of each individual. That said, we have this handy thing called the internet, which is a stand-in for the global brain and global telepathy. And that makes it possible to sometimes get a heads up on what's coming our way. So now I'm going to pull together a handful of signals from my past year, this past year, pointing to the possibility of a door opening for us. So number one, last November, I had 2 terrifying nightmares, and I wrote them up as follows. November 28th, 2022, 1:04 a.m., Monday, dream. This was a terrible nightmare, although I thought I was awake and lucid at the beginning of it. I had just gotten into bed. But I must have slipped into a dream. The whole thing was so real. I was in a long, dimly lit, somewhat elegant room that reminded me of a room in a castle. It was big, maybe 30 or 40 feet wide by 50 or 60 feet long. There was a lot of big, dark furniture, a massive fireplace, heavy curtains, high ceiling. And I was chatting with my childhood friend, Diane, near the fireplace. There was someone else at the far end of the room, a male, who was part of the conversation. He wasn't saying much, but he was all dressed in black, and he had some kind of black veil or netting over his head and hanging down to his shoulders, so I couldn't see his face. I don't know what happened, but the man said something or gave some kind of signal, and very suddenly a strange, suffocating force took hold of me. At that same instant, Diane seemed to glide through the air and slammed into me from behind, pushing, compressing, and strangling me with that same suffocating power. It was an all-out effort to kill me. I began losing consciousness. I was in full panic mode, let me tell you. It was only with tremendous will that I fought the unconsciousness and forced myself to breathe down into the deep depths of my body and the entire body-mind system. I was not expecting Diane to act like she did, and my shock just over that was terrible. I felt completely betrayed. The man at the far end of the room was working in concert with her, and for a few moments, their power overwhelmed me. But by the third breath, or attempt at a third breath, I could feel my body beginning to break free of their attack. I kept breathing, kept trying to breathe. I began waking up, which was really more like coming back to full consciousness. It took some minutes for the shock and the feeling of total freaked out panic to subside. So that was November 28th, a year ago. 2 nights later, November 30, 2022, at 4:03 a.m., a Wednesday, dream. I was in a bathroom in the basement of a large house, and I had to go to the bathroom. I sat down on the toilet to pee, and suddenly An unseen force grabbed my head and forced it to turn to the right. I could clearly feel the two hands, one on each side of my head, but I could not see anyone. I was trying to free my head, and I was on the edge of panic, struggling for self-control when the hands moved to my back and tried to push me off the toilet. I did not resist because I didn't want the force to think I was fighting it and have it ramp up its efforts. So I instead slid off the toilet, pulled up my jeans, zipped and buttoned them while struggling to breathe. And then, as calmly as possible, I walked over to a door in the cement foundation of the house, opened the door, and walked into the backyard. The force that grabbed me in the bathroom reminded me of the same force that I experienced a few nights ago with Diane and the dark man dressed in black. This force was not able to go out into the sunshine or fresh air, and I was free. I saw that I had been in Linda Shepherd's basement and was now in her backyard just a few yards away from my own home. Linda was a neighbor girl of mine when I was growing up. I woke. I rarely have nightmares, and the first one occurred when I had just gotten into bed and thought I was still awake. Usually I can decode my dreams perfectly, but this nightmare didn't fit anything going on in my life at the time. And the second one, involving the same kind of frightening force, brought me to the conclusion that I was facing death, which left me a little bit unnerved and unsettled. So, number 2, coming out of my mental filing cabinet. On February 13th, 2023, I ran into death face to face. A closed loop bowel obstruction took me to the hospital for emergency surgery. A closed loop bowel obstruction is a life and death situation. As soon as I went under the anesthetic, I found myself on board a ship with my people. You probably already heard me say that they asked me if I remembered that this would be necessary, and oddly, at that moment, yes, I did remember. They also reminded me that it was necessary because it gave them a chance to give me some kind of upgrade that would allow me to move into a higher range of frequencies without discomfort or difficulty. Number 3, I spent the next 48 hours going back and forth to and from the ship. During that time, there were not only physical alterations made to my self and my energy body, there were a number of meetings involving lectures and discussions. The only things that I could distinctly recall about these meetings was that they involved the mathematical ratio of 1.618, and that this had something to do with the efforts to create a stable reality. I didn't know what to do with this information, and so I left it dangling in my mental filing cabinet. I spent the next 8 weeks healing, and over that time, I remembered a few more bits and pieces of the time spent on board the ship and the things that were discussed. I wrote them down because it's my habit to keep track of what's happening in my consciousness, but most of my attention was on the events of the world, which were getting more disordered, discouraging, and tense. June and July of 2023 were completely consumed by changes in my business structure. And over August and September, I found myself regularly asking for insight or information into what was coming toward us because I could feel something big, really big. But the only things I saw were the things I already knew and didn't want. Things like the war in Ukraine, the coming banking disasters, the CBDC issue, problems with the education system, the health system, and the drivel coming out of people like Klaus Schwab, Noah Harari, Joe Biden, and the mainstream media. Then number 4 happened. On October 22nd, 2023, I had a dream that I was in a large multi-story building, anxiously, almost frantically searching for something on the 6th floor. I wasn't finding it, and after what seemed like a very long time, someone came in and said, "You're looking on the wrong floor. You have to go to the 8th floor. Look in room 864." I went to the 8th floor and found everything I had been looking for, leaving me greatly relieved. I woke. When I woke and was writing down the dream, I wondered what was the difference between the 6th and the 8th floor. I could not relate it to anything going on in my everyday life, and I could not recall what I had found in room 864 that caused such relief. Intuitively, I felt it had something to do with the 4th dimension, maybe, but while I was in the hospital and attending meetings on board a ship out in space, I had been told that I was already operating at the 4D level, and the upgrade would move me to 5D levels, where I should continue my practice of telepathy. Since I didn't know what to make of the dream, I ended up putting it in my mental filing cabinet, hoping I would get more insight later. Number 5. A few days later, I got an email from John Peterson of the Arlington Institute with a link to a video and the message, "Watch this!" exclamation point. The link was to Rynette Senham's Foghorn Express on Substack. And in it, she told about riding in the car with her partner when a stone kicked up by the truck in front of them hit the windshield and cracked it. A few days later, they were in the car again, and the crack was gone without any attempt to fix it. In an effort to reconcile the disappearance of the crack with reality as she knows it, Rynette opened the possibility that they had somehow moved to another timeline, and she went searching. She then shared a segment of a video in which the narrator was explaining the difference between a timeline based on the geometry of a 6-sided hexagon and a timeline based on the geometry of an 8-sided octagon. 6 and 8. Hexagon, octagon. According to the narrator, the 6-sided hexagon produces the Fibonacci spiral, which, if you've taken any math or geometry, you know that already. Whereas the 8-sided octagon produces what he calls the crystal spiral and the true flower of life. The Fibonacci spiral is based on the number 10 and eventually implodes. He said that the crystal spiral is based on the number 12 and stays connected to source, allowing one to move toward becoming eternal. What's more, the narrator said that the Fibonacci timeline we were currently on was about to cross the crystal timeline on November 8th and 9th, giving us a chance to move on to a higher frequency timeline that would give us access to continuous regeneration and eternal living. Now, if I had not had the 3 instances of coming face to face with death, If I had not spent a couple of days moving back and forth between a hospital bed and meetings on board a big ship where decisions or the discussions were about the 1.618 ratio of the Fibonacci spiral and the creation of a new, more stable reality, if I had not just had a dream of frantically searching for something on the sixth floor and being told to look on the eighth floor, if I had not just been told to look in room 864, which I later learned is a frequency involving total immersion into spirit, life, and love, as well as a doubling of the 432 hertz frequency of healing, I might have completely dismissed Rynette Senum's video and its conclusion that we are about to cross the crystal timeline and move toward reconnection with Source, which would possibly afford us relief from the stresses of the timeline we are on. While holding that information about the two timelines and their imminent crossing as a possibility, I asked for something that would provide further confirmation of this or would refute the entire thing. And I didn't have long to wait. The next day, the title of a video caught my eye. The title was, quote, Grand Hexagon Eclipse, October 28th, Lunar Eclipse in Taurus, YouTube, by Esoteric Sky. I had never heard of Esoteric Sky, but his brief description under the video was, quote, Scorpio season arrives and it brings with it the eclipse of a lifetime, end quote. Obviously, the word hexagon caught my attention because of the information in Rynette Senum's video, so I listened to it. I am sure that the young man who was analyzing the eclipse chart knew what he was talking about in terms of the stars and astrology. But I don't think he knew that what he was saying was the perfect complement and backup to the information about changing timelines. In the end, I had to give credit where credit was due. We may be about to have an opportunity to move onto another timeline, one that will move us away from destructive conflicts, help us regenerate ourselves, and move toward becoming eternal beings. Now, while I cannot confirm that the dates of November 8th and 9th are going to be the actual dates when the two timelines cross, nor will the crossing be completely accomplished in only a day or two, the basic message here is that we have an opportunity to move to a new timeline, and that move is very close. For those who make the shift onto the crystal timeline, there will be a gradually widening rift between them and those who stay on the Fibonacci timeline. The number of people making up the population is likely to decrease on both timelines. Some will go here and some will go there. Okay? And there will be an increase in the use of technology on both timelines, but the application of technology will not be the same on both. One will be helpful, the other destructive. For a short while, people will be able to go back and forth between the two timelines, but it will gradually be more and more difficult to do so. Those who stay on the 3D hexagon-based timeline, the Fibonacci spiral timeline, will move toward transhumanism and technology that alters humans in ways that I don't think, lead to the benevolent evolution of consciousness. It also looks like corruption, control, and wars will increase. And it's common for 3D timelines to collapse in fiery self-destruction. I think it's important to note that after such a fiery collapse, the 3D Earth will recover and heal. A new population will slowly return, but they will not have advanced very much in terms of consciousness or understanding the nature of reality. Systems that form in the third dimension are necessarily very material minded. And that's an okay thing. But they often remain that way. And they often believe they're the only beings in the universe, only what they can see, touch, and feel. The third dimension is a wonderful teacher, but it's not generally an easy dimension to live in. Its main lesson is that you're going to have to live with the results of whatever you create, thus leading individuals to be mindful of what they are creating. Mindfulness calls for personal responsibility, and personal responsibility leads to power. Since 3D realms are often places of great fights over power, those in control are seldom interested in nurturing personal responsibility. The fourth dimension is a result of a different level of consciousness, one characterized by the determination to move away from sickness, selfishness, war, and competition, all that kind of stuff. Those who move to the 4D timeline may initially suffer some setbacks in the transition. Sometimes they need to reset or need to redo or rebuild some things. And they will also lose some population, making it a little more challenging to be able to do that rebuilding. However, the corruption, the control, and the wars slowly decrease. And people adopt a commitment to do no harm. Their scientists dedicate themselves and their work to understanding the more advanced physics of a 4D system. And their education becomes focused on developing the immense potential of each human. They commit to new forms of self-governance and seek relationships with other people from across the cosmos, people from whom they can learn and partner with in trade, knowledge, and technology. And people in 4D often work in tandem with Mother Earth to clean up and restore natural systems. It's important to note that we don't often have the opportunity to move onto a higher frequency timeline. A timeline is the result of the entire series of choices that we make. It's not just one choice. It's a series of choices. So a personal example of this is a young woman in a 3D world who gets raped and later discovers she's pregnant. So let's say that one timeline will be created if she's still caught in the fear, the anger, and the resentment over the rape. She decides to abort the child. She ends up with a feeling of guilt over that abortion that she cannot seem to manage. She starts drinking alcohol in an effort to deal with her feelings, but the alcohol later lands her in jail because of a DUI. DUI is short in America for driving under the influence of alcohol. So she's in jail because of a DUI. That introduces her to a whole host of other people who blame everyone around them for their lot in life. and that results in the ongoing deterioration of her life. So let's say that a completely different timeline would be created if she has made the effort to deal with her fear, anger, and resentment over the rape. Let's say she decides she will not abort the child, even though she sometimes thinks she should. When the child is born, she discovers the miracle of love in watching a tiny human learning to navigate this reality. And she begins to get interested in human development. She decides to go back to school, get a degree in maybe sociology or psychology, and she ends up working with young people to help them unfold their potential, regardless of setbacks, abuses, and the obstacles to reaching their own wisdom, power, and grace. So there you have two examples of two very different personal timelines possible with the same young woman. Every choice she makes has its results. And the same is true for a large population. What each of us contributes to the world is experienced by the whole group. So when the majority of people make decisions that result in interesting, helpful, positive, maybe fun or satisfying or healing kinds of experiences, they pull the entire population toward a higher consciousness. Okay? The opposite can happen if a few selfish or cruel people get into positions of power, or the majority of people themselves make decisions that result in anger, resentment, vengeance, and painful, frightening, or destructive experiences. They pull the entire population down into lower consciousness. Keep up that downward spiral, and there will be severe destruction within that reality system, or even an extinction event. Because a rule, this is a rule in the physics of consciousness, is that like attracts like. Everything and everyone in the reality is affected by everything we do and say, or everything we don't do and say. If we are at the crossover point to an 8-sided, octagon-based flower of life geometric timeline, keep your frequencies in a higher range. And for all those who've been writing to say, how do I do that? Here are some suggestions. First of all, you don't have to worry about getting on the right frequency. Just know you're not trying to hit a single frequency. This isn't like a note in music where you either hit that note or you don't. It's a range. It's a range of frequencies that do not include fear, meanness, anxiety, a desire for revenge, a willingness to hurt other people, or any of those kinds of thoughts and feelings. Frequencies are feelings. Can I say that again? Frequencies are feelings. So if you're trying to shift your frequency, you just need to shift your feelings. Okay? So if you catch yourself feeling afraid or angry, then you deliberately move your attention to thoughts or memories of something that made you feel good or happy or full of love. When you do that, you change your frequency state. Your frequency signature shifts, okay? So you might deliberately recall the humor of watching a kitten play or maybe a puppy. You might recall the feeling that you have when your 3-year-old toddler or grandson comes running to give you a big old hug. You might remember the satisfaction of having completed a big task successfully, or the excitement of having been invited to bid on a big job. Maybe the thrill of realizing that you're falling in love, somebody loves you, or the deep satisfaction of having helped an animal to safety. You might recall the quiet joy of a gift, giving a gift or some assistance to someone who really needed what you gave. And then they are entirely grateful to you. Another thing you might do is sit quietly with a cup of coffee or tea or even a beer and think about gently, keyword here, gently, rearranging your life to do something that you've always wanted to do that would bring you great joy. And at the same time, facing the challenges of how to do this with the least amount of disruption for those around you, yet not back down from yourself. You might take time to reflect on your life and ask yourself if the work you're doing is making the world a better place, or is it somehow helping to destroy that world? Who are you working for? What do they do? What happens to the world because of the work they do? That's a tough one. You might decide that you're going to make the world a better place for all people, plants, animals. And then if you don't know how to do that, you ask the universe for help in discovering, how do I do that? So any one of those will change your frequency. Now, if we are at the time of crossing, this is not the time for doubts and inaction. Okay? It's the time for reflection. It's the time for setting a few changes in motion, for talking with others about things like, what kind of work would you like to do? Asking them, letting them tell you, bringing out the best in them. Let them bring out the best in you. Talk with others about where you would like to live. Ask them where they would like to live. Ask them what kind of governance they would like to have, or tell them what kind of governance you would like to have. It's time for discussing what kind of economic responsibility and taxes you wouldn't mind taking on and what should be done with that money. It's time to think about what kinds of nutrition you would like to have available to you or your children or all of you. Or what kind of technology would expand human potential without invading the human? The point is, if you find yourself caught in anger and frustration about the corruption, the lies, the way some people callously hurt other people, or the fact that the world we grew up in is falling apart, pull yourself up and forward to think about the doors that are opening, doors to the future, the opportunities that could present. There's a whole new reality system out there waiting for us with a lot of new ideas and new ways of being. So that's it for this look-see. And for those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what is happening in our world and where the big trends are headed, or what sorts of crossings we are about to make. So reality is not fixed. Can I say that 100 times? Reality is not fixed. You're not fated to do anything. Okay? It is very dynamic and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice. We take some kind of action. We put something together or we take it apart. Those are the actions that determine the path and the outcome. And of course, once we set something in motion, once we get on that timeline, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. Let me repeat, the opportunity to get on a different timeline doesn't happen every day or even every lifetime. So, and that's exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction we see things going, can I insert here? We can just hop to another timeline. No, let's leave it as it's supposed to be. We can make appropriate changes in a timely way, or prepare for what may look inevitable or what may look possible. If we see something we like a timeline crossing, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. In a physical reality system, you have a lot of energetic structures working together and tightly bonded to one another. Things don't change instantly unless you change the energetic relationships. And we don't do this very well yet. And let me repeat, they don't change instantly. You make the decision, you act on it, you keep acting on it, and you begin to see the change. So before I get too far off track, I'll just say it's important to look ahead and assess what's happening and where are we going, so we know whether or not we need to do something different. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, this is our world. We are creating it one day at a time. Have a great, great month.